Welcome, everyone, to Monday Match Analysis. I'm Gill Gross. Andrey Rublev has duplicated a trophy for the first time in his career. He has won Doha for a second time, winning a 3-set final against Jack Draper. That will be the focus on this week's Monday Match Analysis. I will talk a little bit about Rio at the end. Just a warning, if you were hoping for a really in-depth breakdown of Rio, that will not be in the cards. But I'll talk about both Sebastian Baez, your back-to-back Rio 500 champion, and Alexandre Muller, one of the most surprisingly excellent players to start 2025. Mostly, though, Rublev Draper. It will be a shorter edition of Monday Match Analysis as a whole, but let's get into it. For Rublev, this is another one of these title runs where it's difficult not to think about the margins and how maniacally small they are. This happens a lot in our crazy, crazy sport. But had Rublev lost to Alex de Minaur in the quarterfinals, in which he was up 5-2 in the third set, lost a handful of match points, ended up down a match point, 5-6 in the third set tiebreak. He missed his first serve, and on the second serve, Alex tried to take the return really early. He leaped off of his right leg to try to kind of lower his contact point, and he just didn't quite get the positioning right. The ball ended up too far away from his body. He was reaching, ended up with a pretty weak return, and he was way inside the court. And Rublev, to his credit, zero hesitation, a really confident-looking +1 forehand, blasted for a no-chase winner. He saves that match point, and he ends up winning the third set tiebreak against de Minaur, which, by the way, is a phenomenal win right now. Alex is just playing terrific tennis, a continuation of what we saw last year, although Rublev has played him well historically. Then in the semifinal, it's a third set tiebreak win against Felix Auger-Aliassime, another informed player. I feel really strongly about the way Felix is playing right now. Draper in the final, we'll get into that, but I guess the point I wanted to make off the top is instead of the potential was there for another gut punch loss for Andrey Rublev in what has been a difficult stretch for him. You know, teetering on the edge of the top 10, looking like he might fall out, coming off of a 2024, which was literally his most inconsistent year since kind of breaking out as a top 20 player. And there hasn't been much to feel good about really since the final in Canada. Even that I thought was kind of a bittersweet week because it was such a disappointing championship Sunday against Alexei Popyrin. I feel like this was the most encouraging week he's had maybe since Madrid. So you look at it as potentially a turning point because sometimes one week can make a difference. And we saw it kind of around this time last year on the negative end. Now, this was a pretty odd circumstance. You have the DQ in Dubai. But that was a turning point last year. Never looked the same after that. And it felt like he was fighting himself mentally, which I want to talk more about. But I just think that this week, this title run that he's had, finding ways to win 50-50 matches against top 20 players, that could be a springboard because he should feel pretty proud of himself about what he accomplished last week. I have not lost hope in Andrey Rublev at any point in the last year, even when things have looked pretty bad, results-wise, compared to what we got used to in the previous 4 or 5 years. Because I felt this whole time the identity of his game is still intact. I see no decline physically. I see no decline technically. I just see a guy who has kind of lost his way on the mental side a little bit. And it kind of had felt at times like maybe that was bound to happen with how volatile he is emotionally. But I don't know. I mean, he sustained himself, and I'm not saying it's all gravy, and I'm not saying that he shouldn't be striving for growth. He is. But the point is, here's a guy who's finished 5 in the world, 2 out of the last 4 years. He's made the year-end championships 4 or 5 years in a row now. And I don't see any reason he can't keep doing it if he just gets the mental stuff right. Now, what happened this week? If I told you Rublev has turned into a Zen master, I'd be lying. Anybody who kind of tries to take that angle, I would question whether or not they watched. And I feel like maybe they were just waiting for Rublev to have good results and then to say like, oh, he's fixed. Mentally, he's great. That's not really what I saw here. This reminded me more of the Rublev of the past. Regular, typical Rublev, in the sense he had his blow-ups. He was hard on himself on the court. He got negative a lot, but the resets were pretty swift. And that is the Rublev that I know. An Andrey that is going to have his moments. He's going to show his frustration, but he will move on pretty quickly. And oftentimes it actually won't bleed into what we're seeing in the points as much as you maybe would think it would. What happened last year, I think, is he was really, after the Dubai incident, really struggling with the balance between intensity and calm, and probably just getting away from the intensity too easily. And, maybe instead of that manifesting in calm, it manifested itself in like despondency too often. And that's kind of my read on what we were seeing last year. But you gotta, you also need to give Andrey credit this week for just how many tough moments he overcame. We talked about it last week with Fonseca. That is the true measure of how you're performing mentally as a tennis player, because it's not going to be easy. And if you're able to go back to work and kind of deal with adversity, you're doing something right. And that's what he did. I talked about the wealth of match points he lost against de Minaur. In the first set against Felix, FAA hit a forehand that hit like a sliver back of the baseline. Really kind of painful way to lose a set point. Felix would hold for 5-all. And then Andrey, he went back to work. He won the set 7-5. He lost a match point at 6-5 in the third set against Auger-Aliassime on an attacking forehand. Again, pretty painful way to lose a match point. He should have hit that forehand, and it should have never went to a third set tiebreak, but he played well in the third set tiebreak. So that's what I'm talking about when I mean there were resets. And he's still working on the emotional control. And the last thing I want to say about his mental game, I just want to give him credit for being so open about wanting to improve it, because that's another thing that gives me hope, right? I started this saying I haven't given up hope in Andrey Rublev because he still has his identity as a player. I don't see any decline physically. The technical skills, I don't see anything decaying. And on the mental side, I think at least he's constantly open about working on it. And I much prefer that to, I don't know, like, man, I don't want to take a shot necessarily, but it's hard not to, I don't know, compare him to Daniil Medvedev right now. Another guy who doesn't have a duplicate in his trophy cabinet. Another guy who hasn't had the best 12 months, the last year. And I don't know. I don't think I can say the same thing about Daniil that I just said about Andrey, that I don't see some sort of identity crisis in his game. I think for Medvedev, I do see an identity crisis, because he's talking a lot about the balls. He's talking a lot about his ability to do damage off the ground. And in my opinion, that was never actually his game. And now he seems pretty obsessed with it, pretty fixated on it. And to me, that is him looking to make up for other areas in which he's declined. And he feels the need to compensate by becoming a player that he always had trouble being that guy who is going to actually be able to do damage in a neutral baseline rally for as long as I can remember. But it never used to be a problem. Suddenly, you lose the serve as a huge weapon. You lose the physicality as a huge weapon, which is very relevant, I think, this year. And you start to feel desperate to do other things on the court. That's what I'm seeing with Daniil. So it's kind of a different situation. I think for Rublev, bringing it back to him, he's always going to play with a lot of emotional tension. I just wonder, can he start to, it's just an idea, all right? Can he start to let out some of that tension in celebration? And I do wonder if that would help him. I don't think it's Rublev's personality to celebrate very much, but I feel that all of the stress in his body, he does need a way to let that out. I don't think he's ever going to get to a point where he doesn't feel that emotional stress. I wish he were willing to let it out in a more constructive manner instead of it always coming out on the negative side and never on the positive side. That's kind of just my idea. A little bit of armchair psychologist. Let's get into the final against Jack Draper, the 3-set win. Look, the basis of Andrey's game is taking time away. And for me, it's the 2 Ps, positioning and power. And they're married together, right? They are one. You can hit an 100-mile-per-hour forehand from 12 feet behind the baseline, and that has the same effect as an 80-mile-per-hour forehand from between the baseline and the service line. I might not have my math completely correct, but you get the idea. Andrey, because of how quickly he produces his power, because of how well he plays on the rise, he's often kind of marrying both. He's got the aggressive positioning that takes away time, and he's got the ball speed that takes away time. So if you have a rushable wing, he will pick it apart. And Draper on the forehand, that's the rushable wing. He's got a pretty large loop in his preparation. I'm trying to do it lefty. I probably look like an idiot. But, he's got a pretty large loop in his preparation, and he's got a Western grip. So he gets punished if he doesn't have time to really accelerate his arm. And I think Rublev had a lot of success just testing Draper's ability to produce that forehand quickly, stripping that wing of time, either getting a short ball or getting errors. Now, the positioning part is key in the Draper matchup because Jack has so much shape and RPM on his forehand. He will often push opponents back with that, heavily shaped forehand. I thought Rublev did a great job of holding his ground off of Jack's weight of shot. It requires great timing, and especially in the 3rd set, if you look at how well Rublev protected that backhand side by taking the ball early on the rise, he was on point there. And the backhand, not only on the rise, but also on the run, it was hard, it was deep, it was mistake-free. Like you had Jack really running into problems when he went into Rublev's backhand, not making any progress at all. And that's when Andrey becomes a real handful, because it's not that he's a super imbalanced player, forehand, backhand, but he certainly does have the elite forehand where I think when he's smothering you on the backhand and you're just not getting any relief there, it's pretty tough to deal with him when he's like that. And I thought the way the backhand performed in the 3rd set in particular, it's really difficult to deal with Rublev when that's happening. He was also handling that slider action on Draper's second serve. Again, into Rublev's backhand. This is another thing we talked about last week. Humbert's a lefty. His second serve is a slice, not a kick. Draper, lefty. His second serve is a slice, not a kick. There are reasons for this, but lefties tend to do that. They don't develop the kick serve. They actually want to get that left to right action and find the righty backhand. Rublev really came on to that backhand return. He hit a lot of stifling returns in the 3rd set when Jack started to miss first serves. 2nd set, Draper kind of served the lights out, and I thought Rublev had a lot of trouble just getting, making the quality of return. But in the 3rd set, that wasn't the case. So I thought that was kind of the big key for Rublev overall. I thought he played his game at the highest level that he can. As for Draper, hasn't been healthy this season. This was only his 2nd event. I believe both issues are the same issue. I think it was a hip in the offseason, plays the Australian Open, and then I think the hip still wasn't right and he had to miss more time. I'm not 100% positive on that, so don't quote me. But that's what I think happened here. But again, we kind of hit this storyline with Draper where it's like, wow, he's playing really well, which we didn't necessarily expect because he's been dealing with these physical obstacles. And you almost feel like a broken record speaking that way about Jack Draper, because we're constantly in that cycle of, wow, Draper, incredible. Like, he's just coming back from injury, and now he's making the fourth round, right? He had the the U.S. Open fourth round run a couple years ago where it was the same thing. He was just coming off injury. The Australian Open this year was the same thing. Wasn't expecting much out of Jack. Wins the 3-5 setters against Navone, Kokkinakis, and Vukic. And then he comes into Doha, his second tournament of the year, and he puts together a good run, straight sets over Popper and O'Connell, beats Berrettini, who played awesome against Djokovic. He beat Berrettini in 3. He beat Yuri Lehechka in 3 in a match where he really played a lot of terrific defense. However, physically, you'd have to think that it caught up to him. Having not been getting match reps for the better part of a month, probably, maybe even 5-6 weeks if you look at it. And then coming in, his first 2 matches were pretty quick against Popper and O'Connell, but he plays 2 hours, little over 2 hours, 20 minutes against Berrettini, little over 2 hours, 20 minutes against Lehechka. I thought he got tired in the final. And I never just say that, like, I'll never kind of just say, oh, circumstantially, I think he was tired, so I'm just going to say he was tired. I'll only say that if I actually see things in the tennis, and I did see things in the tennis. I thought he was pulling the trigger on the run a little bit more often. Now, that could be the Rublev effect. Playing defense against Rublev is really uncomfortable. He does not give you... He doesn't kind of relent when you let him operate from the middle of the court. He rarely makes errors when he gets his feet set in the middle, and it's really hard to get back in points. So maybe Draper felt the need to go for a little bit more from defensive positions because of that. But there were some balls that I thought Jack just wasn't really committed to defending on. On add-in in the third set, Love won, which was really the start of what was a snowballing third set in favor of Rublev. Jack hit one of these bailout running forehand down the lines. Just a clear defensive position. Thought Draper just kind of pulled the trigger, went low percentage. Hart just wasn't really in, or his legs just weren't really up for staying in that point. Made a cheap forehand unforced error on the next point, kind of overshaping the forehand and hitting it long, which is, I don't know, an error that, look, I guess it just missed on the baseline. It was really close. So that's kind of the miss that you don't want to criticize a player for when you just miss on the baseline. Like, it happens, but I still do think that Jack sometimes overshapes the ball. Anyway, break point, he serves and volleys. Not a fan of that tactic on the break point. Rublev stands close on return, so he doesn't give up a lot of ground, does not return from deep, and he does not chip returns. So a guy who stands close and doesn't chip, I'm just not really into the serve and volley there. And Rublev picks it off. It's a wide serve. It could have been more angled. And yeah, Rublev just belts it cross court into a big target, but it's hard and it's dipping. And he blows it right by Draper. Basically passes him clean on the serve and volley, more or less. And because I thought that tactic was so questionable, along with the bailout forehand and the cheap error, I just thought that was a stretch of points where you kind of saw Draper's physical state go away on him. By the way, I'll say that Rublev played a lot of long matches in the lead up as well, as we mentioned, back-to-back third set tiebreaks. I just think Andrey's probably in better condition right now than Jack Draper, who Jack, by the way, has pulled out of Dubai, just to give you an idea of how much this would have taken out of him. Big picture, one thing on Draper, I still think his biggest chance to take the next step is to continue to weapon build on his forehand. The set point in the first set was a really interesting one because it was a second serve, and Rublev in this case really just put the return meekly into the middle of the court. He hit a very attackable return. And Jack, from the ad side, decided to hit a +1 backhand and approach on it. Now, I think from a footwork standpoint, I can understand why he did it. He felt that in order to run around the ball, he wouldn't have been able to take it as early. I imagine that was kind of the split-second calculation. Obviously, you don't have time to think about these things. They all happen subconsciously. But by taking it on the backhand, he was able to hit the ball, take it earlier and actually approach. But he ends up hitting a +1 backhand approach into Rublev's forehand from like dead center on the court, really off towards the ad side. On a ball he had plenty of time to run around and really belt a forehand. That's just part of the way Jack's brain is wired right now, in my opinion, where he doesn't look for his forehand as the big bad finishing weapon. And sometimes it can be, don't get me wrong. Like, it's a big forehand. He has incredible acceleration. Again, he hits it really heavy. Not always comfortable flattening the ball out, but like it's a good weapon at times. But to me, he's just not in that mentality of using it as a big weapon. And this was an example. This should have been a forehand. If you trust your forehand and you really want to bring your big weapon to bear, you hit this as a forehand, not a backhand approach into Rublev's forehand. By the way, Andrey, forehand down the line, passing shot. One that wasn't easy, but one that, man, I think it was pretty comfortable. I think when Andrey says, "Oh, on that weak return, Jack is hitting me a backhand approach shot into my strength," great. I mean, Rublev is going to be into that. And then the other thing that I saw a lot here is he was trying to mix in the forehand drop shots, maybe to kind of just bolster the threatening array that he can bring on his forehand. And that shot clearly needs a lot of work. Now, with the Western grip, there's more distance to grip change. And sometimes I find the Western grip forehands have more trouble with the drop shot. But boy, Draper hit a lot really deep. Like, there were a lot of drop shots that were landing around the service line that were like, whoa, like that shot can be a lot better. So those were two things. And they go hand in hand. I'm talking about the ability to finish points when you have a chance to attack with the forehand. That's what I'm talking about with Jack. I think that's the next step for him. All right, wrapping up with Rio. Sebastian Baez goes back-to-back. I crowned him king of the Golden Swing last year. He is keen on retaining that title. And I've been saying for years now, Baez is building one of the truly unique resumes in the sport. If we played a game where, like, you just show me a resume and I'm blind and I don't know who it is, you're just showing me the resume, I think Baez would be one of the easiest guys to pick off, frankly. And part of that is a really impressive title count. Now 7 for Sebastian Baez's career. And he's just started year 4 on tour. So if I were to put it in a decimal point, he's been playing, 3.2 seasons on tour? 3.2 years? What a weird way to put it, Gill. And he's got 7 titles. I mean, that's like really, really good. I mean, he's got 2 500 titles also. So we kind of know where they've come. A lot of it's been clay. One of them is on hard court, Winston-Salem, week before the U.S. Open. So, you have, other than Rio, you have a lot of 250s. And part of the reason the resume is bizarre is he doesn't win off clay, really. I mean, other than Winston-Salem, you look at his career record, off clay, 23-53. And then on clay, he doesn't always win. But when he gets a couple of rounds in, when he gets going, he often goes all the way. I've kind of long wondered, is he just a very confidence-reliant player with the massive losing streaks he tends to go on, and then the title runs he tends to, he almost always goes on a losing streak and then suddenly wins a title. I wanted to look at his records because I feel like Baez is the number one pick for he might not win in his first round, but if he gets to the quarterfinals, look out. I feel like he's like the number one pick for that guy. Well, I look at his career record. In first matches, he's 45-46. He's a losing player in first round matches, but not even first round, because if he gets a bye, still counts as a first match. He's 45-46. In quarterfinals, he's 12-8. So that's a good record. It's nothing crazy, but it's a really good record. In semifinals, he's 9-4. Whoa, okay, that's really good. And then in finals, he's 7-2, which is outstanding. So once he goes deep, he's lifting the trophy more often than not. He played awesome in this final. His forehand was the best ground stroke on the court, which is often the case when Baez is at his best. And then, the speed around the court, it makes it very difficult to finish him off in any kind of way on the clay. He's a really, really tough guy to win baseline rallies against when he's confident on the clay, mostly because of his movement and his forehand. Now, Alexandre Muller is the most surprising name in the race right now. He sits at 11th in the race. For me, the Frenchman has always had a great foundation for consistency and fitness. So when I've watched him in the past, I've certainly seen a guy who plays with a lot of discipline, does not miss a lot of rally balls, has the fitness to back it up. But I've felt at times that he's just not disruptive enough. Like, you're not imposing enough. That's the feeling that I've sometimes gotten watching Muller. But I've seen him then go up against some top players like Medvedev at the Australian Open, and I saw him take on Novak Djokovic at a slam. And in that kind of underdog role, playing against top players, oftentimes he'd show me a little more. And I've thought, that's a little something different. That's a little more spunk in your game, whether it be, more daring play off the ground or dipping into the craftiness. And I just feel watching him now like he's found the ability to play like that against everybody. Now I'm seeing that kind of intention against everyone, where he's built the forehand into more of a weapon. And I thought the forehand, it had a ton of jump this week in Rio, a lot of buggy whip finish, but it never looked particularly overspun. The ball speeds were there. The penetration was still there. Has the ability to kind of step in, flatten out the backhand, go either direction with that. And he will get crafty at times. His hands are good. He will come forward. So I don't think he's probably a slightly above average mover as well. So the serve, not awesome. Second serve, his weakness. If you ask me what his weakness is, it's his second serve. That doesn't matter as much on clay, because you're just kind of getting into the points anyway. And right now, when you're in points against Alexandre Muller, he's kind of good at everything. He might not blow you away with anything, but he's kind of good at everything. And I'm kind of a buyer, because I think he can do it on all surfaces. And I feel like there's been a slow progression where, I don't think Muller's a top 20 prospect, but I wouldn't be surprised if, despite his age, despite the fact that he's a late bloomer, I see some top 50 seasons for Muller. Hopefully for his sake, 2 or 3 of them. That is all I got. We'll have an episode of 3 on Friday. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.